lowest since December 2008. I'm joined by the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Normally, you see a number like that, you'd be dancing in the streets, but unfortunately, this reflects something different, doesn't it?
Well, these are very difficult times for our economy, Kieran. Obviously, millions are in lockdown, the economy's been hurt, and you've also got loss of life as well. So it is a pretty sombre time for the nation. That being said, the economy has an amazing resilience and the fundamentals are strong, and the unemployment rate today falling to 4.6% from 4.9% substantially beat the median market expectations, and the unemployment rate is the lowest level in 12 years.
It's an economy in hibernation once again, isn't it?
Well, it does show that our economic support payments are working and they're effective. We know that the COVID disaster payment has been paid to 1.4 million people and that more than $3.1 billion is already out the door. Payments are being made within an hour, in some cases, of applications. More than 90% of those payments are being done online. And then we've entered into 50-50 funding splits with the state governments on business support. And so billions of dollars are making its way into the economy. But you're right, during lockdown, people have not been able to get about their daily lives or go to work in their normal way.
We could end up in a double-dip recession, essentially.
It's too early to make that call. What we do know is that the September quarter will be significantly impacted. Treasury have made that very clear. It's a function of having our two biggest states in lockdown. But if you compare to last year, the economy is in a better place to recover. We've got about...
that might be the case, but so much, correct me if I'm wrong, rests on New South Wales getting it right. Because if you get to 80% vaccination and they still can't open because the Berejiklian government has allowed it to get away, that's a diabolical scenario, isn't it?
Well, you're absolutely right that this is predominantly and primarily a health crisis with a very significant and severe economic impact. But the vaccination rollout is really gaining momentum. More suppliers coming on board. Vaccine hesitancy is reducing. And we've got that 70 to 80% target of double dose across the country now in sight. And that's what we should all be putting all our energies towards. That is why more people getting vaccinated is the way out of this crisis.
Well, we're seeing these numbers at Homebush today. I don't know if you've seen these pictures. They're incredible. Like a rock concert, people lining up, those in that age group under 40 from the hotspots getting their jabs. It's good to see the hesitancy is punctured. It's gone. You can see these. Look at those images there on the screen. There's people everywhere getting their vaccination, which is the one bright spot, isn't it, out of the lockdowns?
Well, as you know, the Prime Minister secured that extra million doses from Poland. That half of those have made their way to New South Wales with a focus on 20 to 39-year-olds. That is where the virus is transmissible. That cohort needs to get vaccinated, and those additional jabs are going to help achieve that. But I think the message out of today is, while we're not celebrating the unemployment rate coming down to 4.6%, it is a reminder why people can have confidence and hope about the future. And coupled with the strong momentum in the vaccination rollout, we can be confident.
A couple of other issues. You were asked about Afghanistan at your news conference earlier in the day, and the point was made to you that your mother was stateless after World War II, and you asked about the humanitarian response that the government's afforded to what will be effectively stateless people after fleeing Afghanistan. Should we be more generous, like the United Kingdom, with upwards of 20,000 positions that they've offered?
Well, we've already announced the 3,000 spots in our humanitarian program. That's not insignificant. We've also made statements about those from Afghanistan who are here in Australia now on visas being able to stay as long as the situation remains dire in Afghanistan, and we're going to continue to evaluate what other opportunities there are. I think the Australian public understand why we left Afghanistan, but I think they're saddened by what is left in Afghanistan following our departure, and the United States and other allies, because it was a remarkable success story to see 3.5 million women, young girls, being able to attend school for the first time. Life under the Taliban will be very different, and it's a diabolically dangerous and difficult situation.
Is there room to be more generous?
But we're doing everything we can to get Australians out and those locally engaged staff out of Afghanistan, and we'll continue to evaluate our settings with respect to our humanitarian program. But that 3,000 that we're taking in is not insignificant.
Well, it's on top of the visas for those interpreters and others that worked alongside our diggers. But I've spoken to a number of veterans from the Afghanistan conflict who are urging Australia to be generous here. Can you see why they're of that view? Because obviously that's part of their legacy as well.
And absolutely, they help make the lives of so many people in Afghanistan better. At the same time, they help make Australia safer because fighting evil in Afghanistan and terrorism in Afghanistan meant that we didn't have to fight it in the same way at home. That's why we were there in the first place.
So we might
after 20 years, it came to an end.
We might be, more generous like the UK. The UK has said 5,000 this year, 20,000 beyond that. That's much more than what we're offering.
Well, Kieran, Australia has always been remarkably generous when it comes to resettlement of refugees here in Australia. We've obviously had a very strong and appropriately so border protection policy, but with respect to those refugees abroad, those people who are in harm's way, we're going to do everything possible to bring them here to Australia.
We're standing by to go to the Prime Minister. Our viewers can see pictures there of his courtyard. I want to ask you, though, about a speech you gave in launching a book for Senator Andrew Bragg and about the Indigenous Voice to Parliament. You're urging those who want that to happen to bring voters with them. Can you explain your thinking on that?
Well, Andrew Bragg's written an important book and it's about the broader issue of reconciliation, and in that book he traces the very proud Liberal tradition in advancing Indigenous affairs, and he references Harold Holt and he references Malcolm Fraser and land rights, and of course Tony Abbott's passion and Ken Wyatt and so forth, and what we're doing on closing the gap. All of that's been important. But then he touches on the Uluru Statement and the voice and the constitutional change that would be required to implement that. My point is there may be a broad consensus at the moment for some form of constitutional change to recognise Indigenous Australians. But right now, we don't have that broad consensus of support for the voice as being proposed. And my message was that the proponents of that shouldn't put it as a take it or leave it proposition. We should work together. There needs to be further consultation and negotiation. We should focus on what unites us, not divides us. Any change would have to be bipartisan. I think there is still some way to go to achieving that end.
Do you support it?
Well, I support the idea of constitutional recognition, but with respect to the voice, that is a different matter. I've been very public, just as John Howard, Tony Abbott and many other Liberals have been, in recognising in the Constitution our first Australians, and it's been a tragedy that our first Australians have not been recognised in the way that they deserve.
But you're open to the voice? Are you open to a voice to Parliament?
Well, what I've
You sound like you're open to it.
Well, what I've said is Andrew Bragg has written an important book. He's put the arguments out there passionately. There's not the broad consensus for that right now. And what we need to do is try to work through it, but there needs to be flexibility. There needs to be negotiation. We need to focus on what unites us. And whatever is the product of that discussion needs to be successful when put to the people or through legislation or whatever way we decide to move forward with it.
And just to finish where we began on the lockdowns, we go back to that, just to wrap up, the 200th day in lockdown in your hometown.
Yeah.
You've been very critical at times of the Andrews government. But you've come also full circle as well to now supporting the lockdown after tearing shreds off them last year.
Well, you know, the hardest thing in the 1 week lockdowns in Victoria is getting through the third and the fourth week. Look, the reality is we've partnered with the Victorian government today. We've announced an additional $807 million in support for small and medium-sized businesses, recognising how tough they're doing it. So whether it's grants of $2,800 up to $20,000 grants for large hospitality venues. our partnership with the Victorian Government is focused on one thing: supporting Victorians get through this. And of course, the COVID disaster payment is also providing sufficient support. So it's not about point scoring, it's about partnering, and it's about helping Victorians, who are our focus, and that's what we're doing today.
And hopefully they can get out of that as soon as possible.
And get back to the playgrounds, because, you know, I think the impact on kids and young people, as well as old people, but on everyone in Victoria, they're now very, very, very fatigued and weary from more than 200 days in lockdown. It's been a sorry state.
Treasurer, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Stay with us after.